Well, the person you're looking at is Ms. Robin DiAngelo. She's doing her very best to advance the cause of racial justice here in America by pointing out a term in a book that she's had that's been very successful called White Fragility, basically about how white people are so fundamentally fragile because they seem to be somehow obsessed with this idea of preserving their own culture and so on in the face of other evidence. Now, she's doing her very best to show how filled with privileged white people are. To give you just an example of Mr. DiAngelo's thinking, here's just a simple paragraph. Messages of preeminent white value and black insignificance, DiAngelo pronounced, are raining down on us 24/7, and there are no umbrellas. She declaimed my psychosocial development was inculcated in this water, and internalized white superiority is seeping out of my pores. And white supremacy, yes, including extremists or neo-Nazis, but also a highly descriptive sociological term for the society we live in, a society in which white people are elevated as the ideal for humanity and everyone else is a deficient version. And black people, she said, are cast as the most deficient. There's something profoundly anti-black in this culture. Now, so far, I might be willing to give Ms. DiAngelo the evidence, the benefit of the doubt of having some kind of a case to be made here and so on. And I'm a fair-minded guy, try to be as fair-minded as possible. But now we get to the nub of the issue. Because in one of these training booklets on how to eliminate your very own white privilege and your very own white racism, we get a little further down into the text and we find some instructions from a different writer who basically says this. Ideas of being on time, of living by a mechanical clock, of putting work before play, ideas of individualism, ideas of individual responsibility, all of these demean black people and condemn them to a life of inferiority. Basically what she's saying, or what he's saying, what the program is saying, is that it's a form of white supremacy to show up for work on time, to have a plan for the future, to have a budget, to work hard and play later, and all of these other things. And she is claiming that this is what is keeping black people down. And guys, I wanted to examine this because to me, this is the entire crux of the progressive argument and why it is not only incorrect, but evil and damaging and needs to be destroyed. Scott, let me start with you. What this argument from intellectuals is an argument that black people should not have to abide by whiteness ideas like being on time, being prepared, logic, mathematics, accuracy, things like this. These are all white constructs designed to keep black people down. Planning for the future is one of these things. Delaying gratification is one of these things. And she and others are claiming that white people force black people into these abnormal and destructive behaviors and therefore perpetuate white supremacy. When I argue that this is precisely, exactly, 100% absolutely ass backwards. That what she is doing is she is writing a fig leaf cover for people to do the easy thing, the easy way out, and not to abide by the rules that apply not just to white people, but to everybody who wants to be a success in a society that cooperates with each other rather than runs at each other with machine guns. If you are going to be a success in this world and not be a member of the underclass, it is important to go to meetings and show up on time. It is important to be prepared to do the job that you've been hired to do. It is important to do the playing after you do the working. It's important to get married and stay married. It's important to get a high school education. Now, people like this woman are claiming that these attitudes are keeping black people down, but I maintain that it's white progressives like this idiot who are basically giving black people an out to not do the things that every successful person in the entire world has learned how to do, and that has been continuing throughout the world, not just the Western world, for centuries, if not millennia. And I think the whole thing is absolutely condescending. I think it's virtue signaling, and I think it is, in fact, an astonishing astonishing admittance of the inferiority of Black people on the part of this white progressive, to say that they're not capable of doing the fundamental things that you need to do to function in a complex society today.
Well, Bill Whittle, you know as well as I do that those principles and practices have only worked in world history every time and everywhere they've been tried. Come on, let's be honest.
And your point is?
It is, there are a handful of principles that can lead to a prosperous society. There are a handful of principles that can lead to a happy life and a growing and thriving family. And those principles are not owned by anybody. Those are available to anybody. In fact, the shocking thing, if you read the biographies of successful people of any race in any culture, you will find that a common thread runs through them all. They've all been diligent. They've all taken their responsibilities seriously. They've all had the ability to delay gratification. They've all worked to an extraordinary degree. They've all done these things that are just essential for human happiness and success and functioning. And so you're right. Yeah, it's really demeaning to say to any group of people, you actually reminded me of a piece I wrote a while back at scrappleface.com, which is a satire website I used to entertain myself with. And I had this piece. Remember when there was going to be an eclipse or something like that, and the government was saying you should have these special glasses to look at the eclipse. And I had this story where this guy was saying, don't do it. Don't use the special glasses. That's what they want you to do.
Blinded for life.
It's kind of the same way with this. It's like, no, don't use the time-tested principles of success that have worked in every culture, in every epoch of human history. That's what they would want you to do. The man is trying to keep you down by telling you to show up at work on time and devote yourself to your studies and master some area of accomplishment. If these people weren't so committed to keeping others under their boot, it would be laughable. But that's exactly what's happening. And I'm not, I think that there are plenty of viewers, Black viewers who are watching this show now, and those who will never see this show, who would laugh along with us at the absurdity of these remarks. They are the people who have built strong families, they've built their homes, they've built strong communities, they've built strong companies, and in many cases they've served in governance, and they have thrived because of these self-same principles. And they don't look at those principles and go, hey, I think I'll use white man tools this week to see if I can be a little happier. They just look at it as common sense.
Steve, I want you to see if you can just elucidate on this for me, because this dynamic has been so destructive to Black America and white America, and we've been getting more and more of it for 50 years. Yeah. Let's just break down what's happening here. A white intellectual is saying that we are all so filled with white supremacy that we expect that Black people should have to follow white supremacy rules, like showing up at work on time, having a fundamental understanding of language and mathematics, delaying gratification, all of these things. The white intellectual is saying that it is a white supremacist attitude that expects that Black people can do such a thing.
The logic is so self-defeating just
understand?
On the face of it, isn't it?
It is white supremacy to assume that Black people are capable of showing up on time, of speaking decent language, of knowing what a clock does and having plans for the future, that they are that it is a nationalist, white supremacist plan to keep Black people down by assuming and enforcing on them the idea that they learn how to tell time and show up for work like everybody else. If that is not the most degrading, condescending, revolting, disgusting display of virtue signaling that is in fact destroying the entire argument and causing another 100 years of black mental slavery to their masters like white intellectuals like this Miss DiAngelo, Robin DiAngelo, if this is not the most racist, degrading, condescending, supremacist idea I have ever heard, then I will eat my hat.
You know, I'm just barely old enough to remember when racist Democrats, mostly in the South, claimed that blacks were too lazy to hold jobs or to protect their families or any of that. And now you flash forward 50 years and it's, well, racist Democrats saying that blacks are too lazy to do all these things. It's the only thing that's changed is they've dressed up the language to make it sound very scholarly. Speaking of that, let me give you a real world example of the damage this is causing. I started a new daily feature for PJ Media called Insanity Rap, where I cover all the day's craziest stories, typically from the left, for the same reason that what's his name robbed banks. It's where the money is. But I came across a video. It's a college classroom video it was actually from 2016, which I didn't realize when I included in my Insanity Rap last week. But it is a very bright, articulate young lady in some kind of science class, I'm guessing physics, who goes off on this rant. And I transcribed it for Sanity Rap for people who didn't want to sit through the video. And I got the transcript here, and I want to read this to you. As I said, she's very articulate. She knows all of these words, and I want you to hear what they are. She says, Western modernity is the direct antagonistic factor to decolonization because Western knowledge is totalizing. It is saying that Newton, and only Newton, who knew or saw an apple falling and out of nowhere decided that gravity existed and created an equation, and that is for whether people knew Newton or not, whatever happens in Western Africa, Northern Africa. Apparently, I guess physics are supposed to be different in different places and for different colored people. That's me, not her. She goes on to say, the only way to explain gravity is through Newton, who sits under a tree and saw an apple fall. So Western modernity is the problem. The decolonization deals with to say that we are going to decolonize by having knowledge that is produced by us, that speaks to us, that is able to accommodate knowledge from our perspective. So she goes on. So if you're saying that you disagree with her approach, it means that you are vested in the Western way of understanding, which means that you yourself still need to go back internally, decolonize your mind, come back and say, how can I relook at what I've been studying all these years? Because Western knowledge is very pathetic, to say the least. She goes on for a little while longer, but I won't trouble you with it. I bring this up because here is a woman who clearly has a very sharp mind, but it's been filled with pudding. There's absolutely no sense in there. She's been filled with grievances that are so deep that it causes her to reject physics, which, like math, is absolutely colorblind. And when you raise a generation like this, I'm not sure how quickly you get out of this. I'm not sure how deep the damage and the rot is going to go. But when generation's best and brightest would rather have grievances than knowledge, then we're in a real deep hole.
My first response to that example that you gave would be that, Newton and gravity, that's your view of things. That's your science.
Yeah.
And my response to that would be, what do you mean it's your science? It's our science. It applies to everybody. It is a product of human beings. And the advent of the idea of gravity and all of the benefits that have come from understanding gravity, the benefits that have come from understanding medicine, benefit everybody everywhere. And my second question would be, if Newton is just either wrong or one way of seeing gravity, how would you explain apples falling from a tree? How would you explain it? Is it little demons that are flying them down to the ground? Now, that could be true. Let's just say that's true. And let's just say I think it's gravity and I think it's mass attracting each other and you think it's demons or wood spirits or whatever the case may be that have decided they want to move to the ground. Now, the question then becomes, if you have to build a bridge, which one of these two theories can be relied upon to provide the means of building an actual bridge or a hospital or a vaccine or an artificial limb or a surgical technique or any of the other things that make our lives worth living? What this woman is doing by saying that our white privilege is keeping Black people down when Black people should not be expected to do things like understand time, create a budget, delay gratification. What she is doing is she is saying that, don't you understand, these poor, stupid people have been held to standards of whiteness that make them feel inferior. When in point of fact, the only people that are making those arguments are racists like you, Miss Angelo, racists like you who convinced that Black people cannot do things like tell time, show up for work, go and vote, do any number of other things that everyone else is capable of doing, by saying that expecting them to do the fundamental things that are part of any society, including getting an education, speaking a language in a way that you can be understood, all of these things, to say that this is oppression and unfair is a tacit, open admission on your part that they're not good enough to do these things. I don't believe that for a second. I don't know a conservative who does believe that for a second. I know millions and millions of Black people who don't believe that for a second. I know millions of other Black people who are extraordinarily offended that you would make that argument. This is the argument of affirmative action, that we need to have lower standards for Black people to make things fair. What does that say to you? If you're the progressive and you're the person who's saying that Black people are the equal of white people, and at the same time you are making the argument that they should be admitted to college with lower test scores, I cannot see any way to square that circle other than for you to say Black people should go to college too, but they should be able to get in with lower scores because they're inferior beings and they're not as smart as white people, and therefore we have to set aside a special set of lower standards for them to compete by. If you don't find that repugnant and disgusting, there's something wrong with you. And what's wrong with you, Ms. DiAngelo, and people like you, is you're racists. And the part of the racism that you like the most is you get to be seen as the savior of these poor, benighted people. All of your mockery of white history, and there you are in the forefront, carrying the white man's burden to uplift these poor, inferior races that are incapable of functioning on this level. You're practically Rudyard Kipling, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm not impressed, and we shouldn't be impressed. And we should see these things for what they are: forms of control, forms of vanity, forms of narcissism, forces of oppression that continue to reinforce in the minds of so many Black Americans that they need special treatment because there's something wrong with them. If this destructive idea does not go away, we will never get out of these problems. Booker T. Washington, one of the greatest Americans who ever lived, understood this in his bones and said, we will have to come into the larger culture as businessmen, as people with capital, as people who can provide services, and we are going to have to come in as equal, and we'll hire white people to do the jobs that we need to do, and we'll do jobs for white people for fair wages, and all of it. And we lost a very big argument back in those days. She quoted W.E.B. Du Bois in this thing. Black people are not zoo creatures that need special care from the great white father in order to make their lives manageable. And to say that the great white father doesn't realize how destructive it is when he says that, no, I think all people are capable of achieving these things through hard work. You are continuing to fetter the mental chains that have kept Black America in slavery for 400 years now, and all of you seem to be Democrats, and I don't know why that is, but I have a few suspicions. That'll do it for this edition of Right Angle. It's made possible by the paying members at BillWhittle.com, and if you like messages like this where we try to just speak the truth regardless of the consequences, then we could use your help, because we work for you and we don't work for anybody else. We can't be canceled unless you cancel us. And so why don't you hit the green button over at BillWhittle.com and help us continue with this fight. I'm Bill Whittle here with my friends Steve Green and Scott Ott, and we will see you next week right here on Right Angle.